Hi, my name is Ishmael Naylor and today we're going to be looking into rent-to-rent deals. What is a rent-to-rent deal and what type of people you're likely to find that will do a rent-to-rent. So, what is a rent-to-rent deal? A rent-to-rent deal is where you get a property and you rent it out on a fixed long-term contract or rather a management contract. This is not done on the AST. It's not a standard rental agreement that you would get if you were renting out a property from a landlord and living in it yourself. It is a management contract or a lease agreement where you rent it on a long term, where it will state that you are allowed to let the property out to other people other than yourself and you can sublet. But I don't like using the word sublet, but that's how most people describe it, because you're letting it off someone and you're letting it to someone. So effectively it's sort of falls into the category of subletting, but it's not subletting because subletting is illegal because it's done on an AST contract. But this rent-to-rent is done on a management contract, and a management contract allows you to manage the property. So effectively what you're doing is you're taking a property and you're acting as an estate agency and you're renting it out to someone else. So you're just managing a project, but you're giving a fixed return, which some estate agents do give fixed returns. Normally they charge a fixed fee and they give a fixed return because it's insurance backed, but this is effectively you'll find a property, rent it on a fixed length, normally 3 or 5 years. You can go up to 7 years or even longer, but if you are doing it on a lease agreement and not a management contract, then when you go above 7 years it's going to have to be registered with land registry. So you normally do it 3 or 5 years. Also, most landlords aren't going to necessarily want to let their property out to you for more than 3 or 5 years. Now, why would you do a rent-to-rent deal? Well, you would do a rent-to-rent deal when you want to get into property and you don't have much money. Now, it does not get you into property as such because you don't own a property, so you're not actually in property, you're in a property management business. Now, you're dealing with property, so you're getting to know the industry, so you're sort of starting your footstep in the door to become part of the property industry. And you are part of the property industry, but you wouldn't get your foot on the property ladder as such. So it is a way to get into the property industry. So what you would do is you would find someone, say in your city centre. For example, I would say London, but you can't do it in London. You would find somewhere in, say, Birmingham city centre, and somewhere where it would be highly desirable for people to come and stay because there's lots of things going on. So for example, you've got the NEC there and you've got various football stadiums, so you could find somewhere, say, next to the NEC where you can rent a property off a landlord, and then when there's events on in the NEC you can rent it out on a daily basis to these people. So that's one way you can do a rent-to-rent, which is called a rent to serviced accommodation, because you're running it as a serviced accommodation business. We're not going to go too much into serviced accommodation because we're trying to stick to the rent-to-rent model. We'll cover serviced accommodation in another video. And the other most common way of doing it is where you do rent to HMO. So you'll rent out a property, say you'll rent a 3 or 4 bedroom house near a university, and you would do all the compliance which is necessary to make it fire safe and put multiple people in that property. So you'd need things, this is not a full comprehensive list, but you'd need fire doors, you'd need smoke alarms, you'd need, which would have to be mains linked, you'd need self closers on the doors, and you'd need minimum room sizes. There's various things to go into, so I won't go into it too much. But your best thing to do is to check with your local council, because when you check with your local council they'll tell you exactly what you need in the area for the amount of rooms you have that you're renting out. So you might have 1 room, 2 rooms, 3 rooms. You would normally not do a HMO or multi-let property with under 3 rooms, which is the absolute minimum really. 4 rooms is sort of the point where you actually start making profit, so that's where you would want to stick to. And you can go up to 7 rooms, and then you need a different license again when you go above 7 rooms. So again, that's another video. So what you would be looking at with these properties is you'd rent it off the landlord, and you'd rent each individual room out separately. So you might rent it off the landlord at £800 a month. You do a couple of £1,000 worth of work getting it compliant, and with the management agreement in place you would have that property for 3 to 5 years, and you'd rent it out to each individual students, which would have all the bills included. You'd pay all the bills and all the maintenance and management, and you'd give the landlord a fixed return of 800. You might rent it out to 4 students at £400 a month each, so you would be getting £1,600 a month, which leaves you £800 profit before expenses. Then obviously you'd have bills to take off, you'd have council tax if you were not renting it to students, and all these other things. So you can make a nice profit there. It's the same with serviced accommodation. You would rent it out for a fixed fee of maybe £500, £1,000 depending on what city you are, and then you would rent it out on maybe £80, £100 a night. So you'd make quite a big profit, and you would then obviously have to pay for cleaners to come in and for the flat to be cleaned between tenancies. You'd also have to pay for getting the people in the property, because you have a big turnover of people, so you need to advertise to them. And so you would possibly do that on somewhere like Airbnb or Booking.com. You can also get channel managers who do that for you. Some people that I know use Vivo, some people use other channel managers. There's plenty of them out there. I wouldn't recommend one in particular because there's so many out there. I haven't used them myself. The third and final rent to rent would be a rent to holiday let. Now, there's not normally a huge amount of profit in the rent to holiday lets, because generally in a holiday let scenario, the properties in those areas are quite expensive to rent, and therefore when you're trying to do it to holiday let, for longer lets, you're renting out for a week at a time for like a family or something, there isn't normally that much profit in it. It still makes some profit, but there's normally not enough profit to warrant doing it. So what you would have to look for when you're looking for a rent to rent is you'd have to look for what the rent is that you're going to be paying to your landlord, what maintenance you're going to be doing on the property. So normally you'd agree light maintenance, things like painting. If there's door handles which need fixing, small things, you might agree up to £100 for an individual thing that needs fixing, might agree up to a bit more. Normally you would get them to do the boiler, but you could come to some sort of agreement where you pay them slightly less rent and then you're responsible for the boiler. Now some people don't like to do this, but if you get boiler insurance, then obviously you know how much your fixed monthly outgoing is for the boiler insurance, and that might be less than your reduction in rent, so you might be better off saying I'm going to look after the boiler too and make it more attractive to the landlord. The type of people who would do a rent to rent. So generally people who don't want to rent out the property themselves. They've had hassle tenants, they are retiring as a landlord, and they still want the income but they just don't want the hassle. But they were maintaining the property themselves, so they were renting out the property themselves and managing the property themselves. So these are the type of people who would normally do it. I mean, there are people who are still landlords, they still don't mind managing a property, but because you're giving them the going rate for it and you're giving it to them for a fixed period, they don't have voids and their maintenance costs are possibly reduced, and so they might also be willing. So pretty much any landlord would be willing to do a rent to rent as long as the figures are right for them. Now obviously you have to make the figures right for you. On a rent to rent deal, you cannot guarantee having the income from the property. So at the moment a lot of people who are doing rent to rent as serviced accommodation, well, serviced accommodation are shut down at the moment because Airbnb has been stopped to do holidays because of lockdown, and they're just about to reopen this month. So you need to work out that you can still make profit, and that profit is dependent on you, but I would suggest you want a minimum of £500 per calendar month profit for any rent to rent deal, or there's no point doing it. If you're doing a rent to HMO, then the standard rule, because you have more guaranteed tenants and the longer term you keep them in for, I would say that you need at least 1.5 rooms rent. So if you've got 1.5 room rent profit, so if you've got 4-bedroom HMO and they're £400 per calendar month each, you would want at least £600 profit from that property after you pay the landlord and pay all your expenses. So if you like this video, please smash the like button, subscribe to my channel, click the bell notification icon to make sure you get notified of the next video coming out next Tuesday, and I look forward to staying in touch.